Hi everybody, I'm going to kick us off. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD and I'm the host of our coronavirus series of webinars. And this afternoon we're going to be talking about a topic that is only going to become more important as we continue to work from home and those long nights start drawing in, how we maintain productivity while remote working. Now, as I said, it's certainly a hot topic, as some of those rather troubling headlines that I've seen, and I think some of you probably have as well, about employers considering increasing the monitoring of their working from home staff show. So what are the more positive ways of ensuring productivity remains high and that home working staff remain motivated and engaged and able to collaborate effectively? Joining me to share their thoughts on this topic, I'm lucky to have a really fantastic panel of experts. I'm joined by Haifa Monzani, Senior Research Advisor on Data, Tech and AI at the CIPD. I've got Professor Alan Felsted, Research Professor at Cardiff University, who's been carrying out research on home working and its impact on productivity. And finally, Tim Ringo, an experienced HR and management consultant, and author of a new and very timely book called Solving the Productivity Puzzle. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. As ever, let me run through the housekeeping, which if you've seen a lot of these, you probably know off by heart by now, but I'm going to have to do it anyway. The session is being recorded. It will be available afterwards, either this afternoon or tomorrow, and the slides will also be available, so you'll be able to download those later today. And my colleague will put the link where you can access those in the chat. To submit your questions, and please do, because these things are only as good as the interaction we get, please can I ask you to use the Q&A tab, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. So use the Q&A tab for any questions that you want me to put to the panel, but I would encourage you to use the chat function throughout to speak to and connect with each other and to share your ideas. It's really, really great to see that going on, and I'll keep an eye on it, and perhaps I can feed in any themes I see into the conversation. A reminder that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is there for you as a resource and that we're adding things to it all the time. And a reminder that for legal advice, CIPD's members can call our HR Inform helpline, which is available 24/7 and enables you to get an individual response on some more complex legal queries. And the final thing I want to flag is our wellbeing helpline for our members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we're now able to provide CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists, either online or over the phone. So please do remember to look after yourselves. It's such a challenging time. So on to our topic at hand. I monitor my staff with software that takes screenshots. That was the headline of a recent BBC News article that caused some consternation and heated debate on HR Twitter. And it's not the only article in recent weeks that have suggested that some bosses are concerned about the impact of ongoing home working on productivity. With many of us looking likely to be at home until at least spring 2021, how will that impact productivity for the long term? Now, CIPD research has found that 2/3 of employers think home workers are more or equally productive as they were in the workplace. Can we maintain that? But for those employers that have noticed a reduction in productivity, there are issues around lack of engagement and motivation, difficulties in ensuring staff cooperation, and a perceived lack of ability to monitor performance. So what to do about it? And how can we ensure productivity and keep staff motivated and engaged? And how can we collaborate most effectively when working from home? I'll just quickly take you through our running order. First up, Haifa is going to provide some context and CIPD research, and she'll dig more into what I've just spoken about. And then Alan is going to take us through some of his most recent research on this topic. And then Tim will round off with some more kind of practical advice for HR professionals and taking a longer term view of how productivity has shifted. And then we'll go into discussion and Q&A. But please do get your questions in throughout. Don't just leave them till the last 5 minutes. So that is it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Haifa to kick us off. Over to you, Haifa.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to start with sharing some findings from a new CIPD report written by my colleagues in the policy team. It's from the Embedding New Ways of Working, Implications for the Post-Pandemic Workplace. So the stats that Katie just quoted, that was referring to the question on the employer perceptions of home working and productivity. And what we found in the survey was that actually people who used to work in the office and had moved to remote working, they have been more or less, the same, working at the same level of productivity according to the employers. 37% said it had no impact either way. And if you looked at people who said improved to a large extent, small extent, about 29%, and those who said that their employees were less productive, that was 28%. So in terms of shifts, either way, it was roughly balanced. So we can say in conclusion that productivity levels have pretty much been maintained during the pandemic when people have to work from home. So next slide. So the employers who said that, where productivity had been hampered, they said that the issue was to do with lack of staff motivation and engagement, difficulties with ensuring that staff can interact and cooperate, and the lack of ability to monitor staff performance. And other challenges that were quoted in the survey was that actually was also the line management capability in terms of being able to monitor their employees remotely, and that actually they thought that some jobs were probably not that well suited to remote working. In the interviews in the report, there was, for example, one example was the person's job is to find new business, and they found it a lot easier to sit down, have a chat, coffee or beer with someone to explain what the product is and to try to sell them that product. And to do that from home is a bit more challenging. So just to provide them some context in why it might be a problem working from home for some some employers. But interestingly, those employers that have reported that productivity has increased reported the opposite kind of problems to the employers who said that productivity has fallen for the employees. So instead of saying they found that those who found that productivity has increased, they said actually their staff were more motivated and engaged, not less motivated or engaged, and actually that their staff collaborated better and didn't have issues with collaboration. And what has helped is actually having the virtual collaboration tools like the Microsoft Teams, for example, is very popular. The platform allows you to chat with your colleagues and have different rooms to chat, and also video conferencing, which is very important because having the visual cues is very important to know whether someone's engaged or interested in what you're saying. And other tools like other apps like Planner, for example, Microsoft Teams Planner allows you to have like post-it notes and basically share what work that you're doing and what's coming next. So it allows communication between teams. So what I'm trying to say is that actually it's not so much the technology that's in the way when it comes to working from home. It's actually sorting out the people-related factors. We need to sort out the people-related factors in order to ensure that we can continue to be productive working from home. So what do we do about, what can employers do? Those who are citing that, that they would like to be able to monitor their staff better. Is the solution to introduce employee software monitoring? With working from home, there's not really a way for managers to casually drop by, the employee's desk for a chat and just casually glance at what their team member is doing. So in that sense, I can see why that they might want to think about it. But the CIPD's position is that employers should think twice before introducing any kind of monitoring software to measure an individual's productivity. The reason because of this is that if staff do not see the monitoring measures as relevant and necessary, it can damage employee trust and morale. So we did a workplace technology report, which was published in July, and that's one of the questions was that, what do you think if workplace monitoring was increased? And actually very few employees, only 12% said that increasing workplace monitoring has more benefits than downsides. So with any type of monitoring, employers do have a right to monitor, and as with any type of monitoring, if you're thinking of installing employee monitoring software, you need to explain clearly what you're monitoring and why, and define what behaviors you consider as acceptable and unacceptable. And if you are going to go down this route, it's really, really important to consult your employees whether the measures are relevant and necessary. CIPD research on workplace technology found that employers are more likely to see the introduction of new technology more positively if they've been consulted and their views taken on board. Because, you know, by going down the consultation route, you might actually realize, actually, you know, this measure is not appropriate. Maybe I should be looking at other aspects of it. Or maybe actually you don't need monitoring software. You might just need more, you know, daily catch-ups, because, you know, employees are missing the casual chat with the boss, you know, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there. Maybe a daily catch-up would be more a better way of doing it. Actually maybe cheaper, because you're not spending money on software. And of course, you know, there are situations where it might be acceptable to have employee monitoring. For example, in customer service centers, as we know, it's the norm to monitor call quality. And, you know, there are actually software out there that can assist line managers to monitor quality. I've read in an article that there's a software that will flash the heart shaped to the representative if they're not sounding very optimistic. So it flashed them to remind them, okay, you know, you need to be more optimistic in this call. So that kind of tool could potentially help employees perform better at their work without the line manager having to intervene real time. But, you know, you do need to talk to employees and find out how they might react to it, whether they think this is the right way to do it. Next slide, please. So as we spoke earlier, so the issues with home working and maintaining productivity is about dealing with lack of motivation and cooperation and difficulty of monitoring staff. So what can we do to try and mitigate this? I would say as one thing that would really help, and it's certainly the CIPD position, is that employers will get much better results by developing line management capability and supporting staff to get the results. So that means skilling up your line managers to manage virtual teams. We have a CIPD report on developing effective virtual teams. And it talks about the importance of using video conferencing to have visual cues, you know, providing tools to enable, you know, collaboration. So yes, obviously, as a given, the broadband needs to be there, the technology needs to be there. And I talked earlier about, you know, some software tools like Kanban boards. You have your sticky notes to share with colleagues, you know, what work you've got coming up. That's actually available through Microsoft Teams. If you look under the app planner, you can do that if you've got Microsoft Teams in your company. So that the technology side of things, and also, you know, the soft skill side of things as well. The line managers should be working on building team relationships. So not only just making sure that they're checking in regularly with staff, but also making time to invest in team building. You know, just have a time where you can get together and to discuss non-work related items, just to build team cohesion. And also the line manager is really important, plays a key role in making sure that they minimize negative behavior, making sure that, you know, staff are not undermining each other and staff are you know, collaborating as a team. There is also another fourth factor I want to raise before I finish, is that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and unless you're in the few industries that have, you know, not really been impacted, I'm talking about, you know, retail and wholesale, specifically groceries, or postal services, you're probably, you know, need to be more careful with, you know, in your investments. The ONS report on the coronavirus impact on the UK output in the UK economy recently said, you know, the economy did shrink when the pandemic happened, and it has sort of jumps back up as social distancing measures relaxed, but growth levels are nowhere near the levels before the pandemic in February. So obviously what that means for employers is that you do need to be you know, more careful with your investments. But certainly what we can do from a people's perspective is to make sure that we continue to keep staff motivated and engaged through this period so that we can ride out the recession together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hyper. I'm just going to share a comment that somebody's put in the chat. Michelle says, an employee can be sat at their desk in the office and still not be productive. monitoring is quite dangerous to engagement and trust. I'm sure that's something that we can pick up further in discussion. I'm going to hand over now to Alan to take us through his recent research. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Felsted, and I'm a research professor at Cardiff University. I've been studying home working long before it became fashionable, in the mid-1990s, in fact, when I did a study for the Department for Education and Employment and published a report called Home Workers in Britain. Then the term home working referred to outworkers in the clothing industry, boot and shoe workers, and assemblers and packers of various kinds, many of whom were low paid and sometimes off the books. These types of examples have largely disappeared, and the 21st century version of home working now refers to office workers, or what was called back then, new home workers. What I'm going to do in my 10 minutes is to run through some data which paints a picture of, one, the growth of home working since the UK was put into national lockdown in March, and two, its consequences for productivity, obviously the focus of this webinar. I'll be using up-to-date data collected from workers and employers gathered from a series of surveys. Next slide, please. So the first question is, how has home working grown in recent times, before, during and after the lockdown? What's the survey evidence? Next slide, please. One of the longest running data series on the location of work is the Labour Force Survey, the LFS. This is a large survey which is regularly carried out. It contains data from 45,000 workers, or thereabouts. It paints a picture of a long-term shift towards home working before the outbreak of COVID-19. But the change was, could you put the slide back? You're on the wrong slide. But the trend was gradual rather than dramatic, as you can see in the graph. So the year immediately before the lockdown, 1 in 20, 4.7% of those employed, worked mainly at home. That was double the proportion in 2003 and triple the proportion in 1981. The April-June 2020 quarterly data, and that's the latest available data we have, suggests that the proportion working mainly at home rose rapidly in the national lockdown. The proportion has almost doubled to reach around 9% of workers, as you can see on the graph. However, this growth rate is paltry compared to other estimates. The next slide, please, now. One such survey is the COVID-19 study, which suggests a similar but more dramatic and sharp upward movement in home working. This study consists of a monthly survey of around 7,000 workers carried out during the lockdown and in the months since. Its results, shown in the graph, suggest that the proportion reporting that they worked exclusively at home rose eightfold, from 6% of workers in January, February, to 43% in April, as you can see with the red bar there. And even though it has fallen, it fell by June, it has remained high throughout the lockdown months and beyond. Hence, I've added my lines of rapid growth and a slow decline since April 2020. It's important to say here that the LFS and the COVID-19 study questions are not comparable, hence the different estimates. But the trajectory is clear, a significant rise in home working prompted by the national lockdown. Next slide, please. Furthermore, the prevalence of home working has remained high in the months and weeks after the national lockdown. The data shown in this graph are taken from an Office for National Statistics survey of around 2,500 adults, which has been carried out every other week since the national lockdown began. The survey suggests that throughout the national lockdown, between 40 and 50% of workers were carrying out some of their work at home. However, the proportion fell to around 1 in 4 workers in late August 2020, hence my arrow there, as restrictions were lifted. But since then, the proportion has risen by 7 percentage points, as restrictions, as we all know, have been reintroduced and workers have once again been told to work at home if they can. Next slide, please. Employer surveys also reveal a similar pattern. This figure shows the results of a recent survey of 5,500 employers in the UK, again from ONS. Over a quarter were using home working as a direct consequence of COVID-19, which is the red bar. Just over a fifth of employers reported that they would like to continue to use home working after the pandemic has passed. Next slide, please. What then are the productivity consequences of this enormous rise in home working? Well, employers often have fears that productivity will fall. Why? Well, a concern that out of sight, home workers will shirk. A concern that employees will not be able to learn from one another, given that a lot of learning takes place on the job, in sight and within earshot of others. A concern that innovation will suffer as employees become less engaged with work and their work colleagues. A concern that effective team working will become more difficult. What's the evidence? Next slide, please. One source of evidence comes from the COVID-19 study and its June survey. Those who had worked at home in the previous month were asked to compare how much they were able to get done per hour compared to what they were able to do before the pandemic. This provides a then and now comparison. As you can see from this graph, on the whole, home working did not appear to have affected productivity positively or negatively. It appears to have made little difference either way. Next slide, please. Those who were working at home were also asked whether they would like to continue to work at home when social distancing restrictions are fully lifted. 9 out of 10 said that they would like to do so. Around half wanted to work at home always or often. Furthermore, and this is the important thing, the most productive are the keenest to work at home in a post-COVID-19 world. I'm looking here at the charts towards the bottom of the screen. Around 30% of those wanting to work exclusively at home in the future reported that they were able to get much more done when they worked at home. This compares to around 5% of those who did not want to work at home in the future. So see the left-hand side of the bottom figure. Compare the red and blue columns. The right-hand side of that chart shows the reverse, with those not wanting to work at home, again, reporting that their productivity had taken a major hit. That's compare the blue bar with the red bar. So going forward, letting those who want to work at home the ability to do so makes good business sense and may actually even increase future productivity. Next slide, please. Evidence from employer surveys also corroborates these findings and echoes what Haifa was talking about earlier from the CIPD, namely that home working itself is having little effect on productivity. Most say that productivity did not change. That's the black column. This pattern is remarkably similar to the employer results shown earlier. Next slide, please. A fifth of employers surveyed by ONS said that they intended to continue to use enhanced levels of home working in the future. Increased productivity was the third most popular reason reported from doing so. Look at the red bar. However, reduced productivity was not a strong reason for not using home working in the future. The red bar at the bottom. The more likely cause was the inappropriateness of home working for the business. That is, some jobs simply can't be done at home. Think, for example, lorry drivers, firefighters, paramedics, cleaners, and so on. This is shown in the black bar, which is very high. Next slide, please. It would appear then that increased levels of home working are here to stay, hence the newspaper headlines on this slide, and I could have chosen many. The shift, of course, has serious implications for future office space and its organisation, and the nature of the city, given that city centres, given that many bars, restaurants and retailers are dependent on the spending power of office workers. Next slide, please. On this, the Financial Times and the Daily Star, two unlikely bedfellows, agree. But the survey evidence suggests that a shift to home working is not at the cost of falling levels of productivity. Next slide, please. For those of you interested, much more detail can be found in the Home Working in the UK report, details shown on this slide. More broadly, those on the call might be interested in checking out the propelhub.org website for more webinars and other events on the issue of productivity and employee engagement. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I can confirm that I wear deodorant every single day, but not a waistband. So that definitely has kind of gone off, gone off the agenda.
Can I also add there, very interesting, in the Daily Star, not my chosen, I don't read it every day, but I do look at the headlines on the BBC, and it's predicting an increase in the sale of jogging bottoms.
Oh yeah, well definitely I have been contributing.
Which is what I'm wearing today, I admit.
Thank you so much. We've got some questions coming in. Please do keep those coming in, and I'm going to hand over to Tim. Tim's going to kind of take us outside of this COVID world and into a kind of more general viewpoint of what's been happening to productivity. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Katie. My name's Tim Ringo. As you can see here, I've got a 30-year career as an HR practitioner. I've been implementing HR and business change for a very long time, which is why I have gray hair. As you guys can all appreciate, it's not easy to do. These days, I'm an author, a board advisor, and conference speaker. I retired during the pandemic. In fact, it was planned last year to do that. So I chose the right time to, as we say in America, get out of Dodge. I was a senior executive at SAP SuccessFactors most recently. Before that, I was at IBM. I was a managing director at Accenture. I'm a chartered fellow of the CIPD. And my latest book, Solving the Productivity Puzzle, just came out in August. And I'd already been looking at the challenges around productivity from about 2018, because many of you probably know that productivity has been on a downward trend. People productivity has been on a downward trend since 2010. And in fact, it's the longest period of sustained decrease in productivity in economic history. And economists are pretty stumped by it. And I came across a paper in 2018 by the OECD that said this trend is going to continue for the next 40 to 50 years, which I found astonishing and really didn't agree with it. I thought it was way too pessimistic. So I went and researched some of the things that have been going on. And I take more of an optimist view. I think we're actually doing things that can solve the productivity puzzle. So I'll walk you through a little bit of that today. So this is kind of a broader view on productivity before the pandemic, but the book was really good timing because it's obviously a very important subject. So next slide, please. So the first thing, when I sat down to sort of write about this subject, I ran into an immediate problem, which is that I went and looked up the definition of productivity. And as you can see here, it's really quite boring. It says various measures of efficiency of production. A productivity measure is expressed as a ratio of output, et cetera, et cetera. It's very 20th century, early 20th century, actually. And I just thought, well, I can't really, create a framework around this with that sort of definition, because in the 21st century, I think productivity is very different. And, part of the problem I found in terms of why productivity is going down is we're not measuring it properly. Now, even if we did start measuring it properly, that wouldn't fix it. But nonetheless, that's the first problem I ran into. So I thought, right, I need to redefine it. I need to make it more three-dimensional, more sort of 21st century. So I came up with this on the right, which essentially says getting stuff done that measurably improves the economic and human interests of organizations and society at large. I think productivity today is much less about widgets and producing widgets, and it's much more about a broader socioeconomic situation. So when I expanded the definition, I was able to start to create a framework that I think would help solve the productivity puzzle. So this was one of the challenges that I ran into, which is, well, how do we even define it? So hopefully you might think that's a little bit more interesting definition, but it certainly helps. So next slide, please. Now, at the core, when I started to look at this, and I look back at my career in 30 years, people's motivation is so core to what we do. And I just love this quote, and I've got it on my website as well. Everyone has been made for some particular work, and the desire for that work has been put in every heart. And, I look back at my career and things I did. One of the things I really used to focus on was what motivates the individual, what motivates the team, and I tried to get to understand people and kind of what their aspirations were. And I think that was one of the things I found in challenges around productivity is we just kind of treat work as transactional. It's I'm the manager, I give you something to do, and therefore you do it, and then I reward you at the end. Very transactional, very one-dimensional. But I think, again, back to the productivity definition, I think we need to broaden the kind of definition about work, which is, we should know what we want to, we should try to figure out what we want to do and try our best to get there. And then organizations should help get those people in those positions where they flourish, right? And guess what? Their productivity goes up quite dramatically. Next slide, please. So I came up with this quote unquote equation, and it's something I saw over and over and over again in my career, that I heard CEOs and top executives say, if I could just get the right people with the right skills, the right place, right time, and equally the right motivation, that would be fantastic in terms of execution. That would be fantastic in terms of engagement. And oh, by the way, I think my company would perform better. And so really, I've just kind of, when I looked at the problem, I said, that's exactly right. And in HR, I think this is what we're trying to do every day. And I think the OECD misses this, right? So the OECD says that productivity is going down because organizations aren't aligning people to new technology. They're not changing their processes to adapt to the new technologies. And lastly, they're not changing their organization structures to adapt to the digital world. And I think to a certain extent that's true, but I think we're doing a lot better on that at the moment. And I'm sure many of you perhaps are out there looking at this and nodding and saying, yeah, this is kind of what we're all trying to do. Now, the good news is what I found is when organizations implement the mindset, first of all, of what I call PEIP, then they implement the processes and then the technology to do this. You get this thing that I call PEIP, people engagement, innovation, and performance. And over again, companies that I worked with that had this in place as their kind of core operating model, people flourish in those organizations. Their productivity goes up dramatically. And guess what? You get more innovation, you get more performance in the organization. And it doesn't stop there. I look out into the future and say, I think we're going to see historic people productivity because I think if you take PEIP and you multiply it times these emerging AI and machine learning technologies, I think what we'll see, and we've seen this throughout history, people will harness that technology and almost augment themselves in their productivity. And I think, for me, I see organizations and I see practitioners like yourselves, putting right people, right skills, right place, right time, right motivation. And I think in the future, we're going to multiply that times the technology. So I'm in this optimist camp that says we're moving in the right direction. And in fact, I think, and what I've seen anecdotally and also in some of the data and some of the things that Alan presented, I think we've been knocked onto a different path by this pandemic. And this new path is a good one, right? I think it is going to be, finally, we're going to focus on productivity, not just of workers at home, but those who can't work from home, right? I think we're going to start focusing on the whole picture. And so I'm quite optimistic about the future. Next slide. And really, if we want to bring it right down into the kind of practitioner's realm, this is a model I've used for over 20 years. In fact, I used it for the first time with the CEO of British Telecom in 1999. Because he was trying to describe this idea, if I could just, attract the right people, if I could, give them performance objectives and learning to develop them, if I could then connect and enable them using this new wacky internet technology. Remember, 1999, it was all new. And then if I could deploy them to the right place. And essentially, what he was describing is, recruiting and onboarding that's integrated then with performance and goals, that's integrated then with learning, and then is integrated with workforce management and succession, right? So I'm bringing it down to the kind of practical level. And this is the thing that I think a lot of organizations are doing. They're creating this kind of integrated employee experience where this is something that is completely in the processes, in the mindset, and the technology. And guess what? CEOs love this because they can take their strategy, which is kind of their baby, they can throw it into the organization, and they have more confidence that people can execute on it because you can give them goals to do it. You can give them development to help them do it. You can connect and enable them. And lastly, get them in the right place at the right time to do that. So I'm very optimistic about the future. And I think, and I talk in a lot more detail in the book, obviously, about this, but and there's a lot underneath all of it, right? I'm just touching the very top of it. But these are practical solutions that I've seen work, right? In the companies I've worked in IBM, SAP, Accenture, and the companies that I've worked for as a consultant. And so, the OECD is missing this. I'm very positive about what's coming. And I think having been knocked onto this different path by the pandemic, it's all kind of grim at the moment. But I do think hopefully next year things are going to be a lot better than they are today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for ending on an optimistic note. I'm just going to be cheeky and ask you a question from myself before I get to some audience questions. Is what do you think about what we choose to measure, not even as organisations, but as kind of whole countries and economies, and the kind of GDP as a measure? Rather, do you think we should focus on things more like well-being? I know there's a lot of talk going on about that kind of thing right now.
Absolutely, and I talk about this in the book a lot. I sort of list out the kind of 10 things, which I don't have time to go here, but some of the key things that I found in terms of improving productivity. One is wellness and well-being, and guess what? That's really important at the moment. And I think we have to measure that kind of thing, which is what people call corporate happiness or people happiness. I think that's part of it. But when we get really focused on shareholder, profits and share price. And we get focused on GDP, it's only a third of the picture. There's these other things which are, the human interest, right? So what motivates people, getting them in the right place, helping them to flourish. I think those are more the things we have to add to those physical measurements. Those physical measurements are not going to go away, right? Because even, the Chinese communists are capitalists these days, right? So we're still going to have those physical sides, but I say reduce that down to about a third. And let's start measuring these broader things around, the human interest, society, and the organization.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take some questions from. Oh, sorry, Alan. Did you want to come in on that?
Yes, sorry. I did want to come in that. Yeah, I totally agree with Tim there. I think the other things we should be looking at, and I know CIPD are very keen on this, is job quality. And that's very, very important now in the world in which we live. And the connection between job quality and productivity. There's a strong connection between job quality and productivity and things like employee engagement. And just in the chat, I put up a link to an article that makes that connection between employee involvement and enhanced productivity and innovation at work, because productivity is going to come from individuals. It's going to come from employees, and it's harnessing those ideas that's very important. And job quality is a way of doing so.
Thank you. And yes, CIPD has lots of work on job quality, specifically through our Good Work Index, which maybe one of my colleagues can share in the chat. I'm going to come to some audience questions. And Haifa, I'll put this to you first. Question about performance. Should managers be resetting, redefining, or scrapping their pre-pandemic performance appraisals set for employees that apply a complex group of challenges that are less achievable and impossible now? So should we be rethinking performance? And how can you check on performance and activities when people are working remotely?
I agree. I think we definitely need to look back at the performance objectives that were set before the pandemic and question whether it's still achievable and relevant in these times. Definitely agree on that. And that obviously has to be some personal conversations to back and forth between employee and manager to agree on that. What was the second part, sorry?
How can you check up on performance?
Okay, checking up on performance. This is where the line manager skills of managing virtual teams comes in. We could possibly borrow common practice from the IT industry, like agile project management, where it's quite common to have 10-minute daily stand-up meetings with the groups, and then keep in touch through chats, and then having post-it note boards. We've got tools like Trello and Planner, Microsoft Planner, where you can communicate between colleagues what's coming, what's pending, and what's finished, and so on.
Thank you. Tim, can I ask you if you've got any thoughts on the checking up aspect when we can't see people? And is that something that HR practitioners should be concerned about, or should they be talking to people managers and helping them to see that perhaps there's a different way to manage?
Yeah, definitely. I think HR has a huge role in this. It just drives me bonkers, this idea that we need to track daily what people are doing. Look, we're in the workforce, we're adults, right? And where I've seen the best teams and the best working is when the manager is there more as a coach than someone who's checking up on what you do. Give people very clear objectives, give them clear outputs, and let them get on with it, right? And it should be measured on what what their output was, not how they went about doing it, how many hours they spent doing it. People really need to be kind of left to get on with this whole idea of autonomy in the workforce. I think we're going to see a major leap in managers' comfort with giving people autonomy just to get on with it, right? Because they're seeing that, wow, they weren't in the office, and hey, we still had good productivity, as you saw in Alan's data. So I'm just hoping that this new path that we're on is going to get away from this kind of daily management, checking up on you, to just let people get on with it and measure them on the outputs and the quality versus the day-to-day.
And following up on that, Alan, have you got any advice on how to kind of help managers with that? Because it's a different skill, really.
Well, I think probably not so much. I don't come with necessarily, my skill set isn't giving advice to managers as such. But what I can say is, before the pandemic, what was very noticeable, I did work on who had the opportunity to work at home. And I'm emphasizing the word opportunity. And it was very obvious that the opportunity for working at home was given to the most trusted, usually the higher paid, those in more skilled jobs. And there was a mistrust of giving the opportunity to work at home from those who were not in those groups. The pandemic has changed that. I mean, and that's the major thing. It's changed that. It's spread home working to a wider group. It's still the case, however, that most of the people working at home are kind of relatively well-heeled, but it has spread to some extent, that opportunity. And it has proved that you can trust people. I mean, Tim's point. Give them trust. They need to be trusted. So I'm very much against the idea of using monitoring software devices to actually monitor productivity. I think that's the one way to go, and a more effective way is to monitor people by their output. And you might well find that actually what they're doing is they're putting more in. They're working longer hours, not shorter hours, to get those outputs. Now, from an employer's point of view, that's no bad thing necessarily. And that's what the evidence suggests. Before the pandemic, those who were working at home before the pandemic were spending longer working at home. Now, that has obviously negative consequences for work-life balance and so forth. But from a pound, shilling and pence point of view, from an employer, it's an effective way of using people's skills and allowing them to flexibly organize their lives, both work and their other lives.
Thank you. I'm just going to read out a point that Steve's put in the chat, which he says, I feel that using terms like checkup and monitoring instantly pushes people to be defensive and feel micromanaged, and you need to position anything like that very carefully to get a positive result. Well, thanks for that comment, Steve. Alan, I'm just going to start with you again, because I think this is probably directly related to your point you made, the headlines you flashed up about sales of deodorant going down. Has anybody started to look at the self-confidence benefits and less emphasis on how people look from working virtually? Paula says, I noticed my students were wearing careful makeup when our workshops were face-to-face, but when we went online, their first freedom was not wearing makeup and they felt happier. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts. It's quite a kind of anecdotal fun question.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, as you can see, I've got a tie on. Although, as I said earlier, my bottom half is a bit different. But there we go. I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. I think this whole shift, and it's a radical shift, as my figures suggest, a huge shift in the change in where we work, has massive implications. So I can't answer that question. I think that's a research question that needs to be answered going forward. As I would also say, another research question that I touched on towards the end of my talk was the nature of the office. I think that's another big change. We're going to have to think about the office in a different way. Offices before the pandemic, tended to be high density places where things like hot desking was frequently used, desk sharing, hot rooms, all those kinds of things. That's a different world, seems to me. So we're moving into a very different world. More people are going to be working at home. That's going to be a less need for office space, a reconfiguration of how we operate within offices. And these are questions to come, I think. So I'm sure in the future, a webinar, Katie, will be on this theme going forward, the changing nature of the office. And the other things that you raise about, has been raised about dress sense, dress codes, and so forth. I mean, these are all kind of to be discussed, to be explored later, I think.
Josie, you're the first person I've seen in a tie in quite a long time. I like in a tie, Tim in sportswear. We're covering all the bases. Question from Angela. She said she's recently read an article that says tapping on our keyboards at home and sitting on calls and webinars all day might have sucked the productive life out of us. Is continued working at home going to lead to long-term productivity problems? is it that it's a comfortable and popular option rather than actually being the best one for the economy in the long run? And Haifa, have you got any thoughts on how it might be decreasing productivity in a way as we're just sitting on screens all day?
Would Alan like to answer first, or shall I go first?
You go for it, and then I'll go to Tim, then Alan.
Okay, I would certainly echo what Alan said earlier about, let the people who want to work from home continue to work from home, and then those who want to return, because then you'll get the best of productivity from both groups of staff. So you're going to have to remind me the question again before I go off.
So I've just lost it. I'll just put it somewhere else. Let me find it. That actually working from home might lead to productivity problems if some people feel that being on a screen all day is making them less productive, basically.
Yeah, so being on a screen all day, then there's the issue of making sure that people don't burn out, from too many back-to-back Zoom calls. So that's something, I guess from HR perspective, we need to remind employees to make sure that they take screen times, they have scheduled regular breaks, and it's, I think all we can do is just remind people and get line managers to remind their employees as well, their team members.
And Tim, can I put to you same question, but maybe to pull out the point Angela makes at the end, that working from home might be a comfortable and popular option, but does it actually, is it good for the economy at large?
Yeah, I think it's good for the economy at large. Let me go back to the person though first, because my main concern, and from talking to loads of people who suddenly were working from home, we've tried to take the analog world and put it into the digital. So we've tried to cram those 1 hour meetings that we've always had into Zoom. And that really worries me, because that is wearing people out. And I think we need to, and I think HR should start pushing back on this and say, look, can't we do these in 15 minutes or 30 minutes and create space in between? So I think without a doubt, what I've seen, the home working has increased people's productivity, but it's increased their stress and fatigue, because they're cramming so much into a short period of time. And so I think trying to shorten up these calls a bit and do a little less Zoom would be a good thing, and it would increase productivity even more.
And Alan, did you have anything to add on this kind of longer term impact?
Well, I think it's another good point. I mean, my evidence was, as I said there, it's still kind of real time. It's June of this year, so that's pretty recent, but it's still June. And the question will be, how long is that going to be? Is that sustainable? Is that picture sustainable? I think the question here, my response really here is, we'll have to wait and see. I know, for example, that I'm involved in some research that's actually looking at the same question, repeating it in subsequent later on this year. So we'll have to see. And I would probably say to the CIPD the same. The CIPD also needs to monitor this to see whether there's a fall off. Is the kind of honeymoon period. We're in a honeymoon period, and now we might fall off and get burnt out. This is something to watch for, I think. The evidence, though, at the moment suggests that it's not that detrimental to productivity. Clearly, there are some for whom it is detrimental. The graphs show that. But on the whole, the fears of employers don't seem to be played out in a multitude of surveys. This is why I include a multitude of surveys, just not one source. It's a multitude from employees, employers, and employers. So from both perspectives, we're getting the same kind of message. So at the moment, I think it's a positive picture that we've got. Obviously, we just hope it continues.
Thank you. And I love that point that you made, Tim, about we kind of dragged and dropped old ways of working into this new way. And it's no wonder that everybody's probably feeling a little bit burnt out and tired by now. A question from Steve. More companies I engage are moving towards an agile way of working, using regular stand-ups and retrospectives seems to be helping with morale and keeping everyone engaged, which in turn is supporting productivity. What are the thoughts of the panel on this way of working? Haifa, can I ask you first? You did mention agile earlier.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Katie? Sorry.
What are your thoughts on kind of this agile methodology for ways of working? Can that help morale and productivity?
I think it can, used the right way. Seems to be very, well, it's been around for a while, and it's popular within IT industry. And my husband, he's been working from home for the last 10 years. He's a developer and software developer, and he works for IT firm, and that firm has grown from just like 15 employees to 300, and then he left another firm which actually also was a startup around the same time, and then it actually, grew to 1,000 employees. So it is possible to have mostly employees who are working from home. Their model of employees is actually remote. The developers are mostly working from home, so it is actually the norm, and they practice agile not so religiously, but they do aspects of it, like daily catch-ups, having regular team sort of team chats, and having like private social rooms. So they have the sort of work channels, so we talk about work, and then you also have like the social rooms. They have a channel to talk about your kids, a channel to talk about your pets. So you have. So I think definitely we can borrow ideas from agile to other industries.
And Tim, you worked in the IT industry and tech for a long time. Is it something that you've seen help with productivity?
Yeah, I did. I mean, when it's been around quite a long time in the IT industry, as Haifa said, and I'm really glad to see that now other industries are starting to adopt it because of this new path that we're on, and I think that's going to be very, very positive for productivity. And I think also, as you said, Katie, I think in terms of people's engagement with their work, I think it creates a kind of new way of working for those that haven't had it in their industry. And in fact, I've been really surprised to see that kind of trend of agile working, mostly sitting in IT for years now. I've been wondering why other industries hadn't picked it up, but I think we're going to see that now.
Crisis is an opportunity, right, to change the way we do things. Alan, a question here about are pre-pandemic targets and even kind of office designed processes still relevant? Or should we be redesigning how we do things?
I think that's a redesign. I've kind of intimated that before. I think we're in redesign. I think one of the biggest changes, I would say, in the world of work has been the growth of home working. I mean, I've been studying this phenomenon since the mid-1990s, as I said at the beginning. It was not fashionable then, and it meant something entirely different to what it means now. It's a world away. We've changed hugely. But the change has been so dramatic and so sudden that I think it's going to have lasting effects. And as the evidence suggests, many people will remain working at home to some extent. And I think this will have major effects on the nature of the office going forward. I don't think there's any way of turning this back. There will be a fall off. There won't be as many working at home as the figures are showing. I mean, but we've got used to it. Many people have got used to it. Of course, there are those who don't enjoy it and will return. I mean, clearly. But there are many who've got used to it. I mean, it's 6 months plus since I've been in my office, and I'm sure everybody on this call has been in the same. We've got used to it. We're having to reinvent how we organize ourselves work-wise at home. We're all having to reinvent our timetables. We don't have the kind of daily commute, which actually was useful. Certainly, I'm talking personally, actually in kind of downloading oneself before you get back to your other world. So I think there's major rethinks going on here. Before the pandemic, certainly mid-1990s, people were predicting that we're all going to be in electronic cottages. Those predictions never came to pass. They were wild, and I said so at the time. But they're here now, and it's with us. And I think that's going to be the long-term effect. One of the long-term effects on the nature of work is going to be this shift and how we cope with it, how we redesign offices, how we present ourselves, the tie and so forth in different fora. These are kind of are going to persist for many years and maybe decades to come.
And a follow-up question someone's just put in for you, Alan. From your research, how much has improvements in technology driven change in working from home? How big has that impact been?
Huge, absolutely huge. We wouldn't have been able to do this 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. There's no way on earth. But even 10 years ago might have struggled. But we're all got used to it. So it's made it easier. So absolutely huge facilitator of this. So in the mid-1990s, the predictions were wild. We didn't have the technology to do that. But we do now. And we can do it. We're all doing it. So absolutely, the technology has been has saved us in some sense, and has enabled to do working at home much more effectively. And I'm sure it will improve. It will have to. We were talking earlier offline about how technology will need to improve, will need to catch up to provide us with the facilities that we want, to try and provide us with the kind of networking that we miss, because there's things we do miss. There's no doubt about that. So again, going forward, I think we're going to move to a hybrid form of working. I think people will spend some time in the office for that networking, but I think they'll spend much more of their time as well at home than they used to. So I think we're moving to a hybrid form of working.
Thank you. And Haifa, I see you give a wave. You want to come in on that?
I just wanted to add on the point that Alan said about, if this happened 10 years ago, it would have struggled. I mean, we didn't have web video conferencing 10 years ago, but the subscription models were nowhere as cheap or easy as it is now. The rise of software as a service, where you can just, subscribe to something for a month, or even try something for free, like Zoom. You have, free calls for 40 minutes. You can try things, don't like it, try something else. It's, the investment of time to try is very small. So, if you don't like it, just try something else. It's not such a big deal if you don't like it, and these days.
Brilliant. So Alan mentioned that hybrid approach, and I think that's definitely where we're going. But how do we prevent feelings of inequality for employees and organisations where there's a mix of people who work from home and those who can't? And it's usually those lower paid jobs. And Tim, do you have any thoughts on how you get a hybrid model to work effectively and to make sure that everybody feels kind of included and part of it?
Yeah, I don't have any sort of ready solutions at my fingertips, but I think this is going to really be a challenge once we get past this pandemic situation, and as Alan and Haifa said, we've moved into, this is business as usual. I think this is something that's going to have to be looked at really carefully, about how we make sure that those that work from home are not discriminated against those who work in the office. And I think that'll be a really interesting area, Alan, perhaps for you to do some research on. But I don't have any ready. I think the thing that I worry about, though, in this is that and Alan mentions the de-densification of the office. I think that's going to be really important, because offices were just way too crowded and really almost impossible to get anything done in. And I think this is going to help that a lot. And so therefore, maybe that'll be part of the solution in terms of making sure that we don't discriminate against those that work from home. But getting back to the point, I think that a lot of people are still going to go into the office, maybe a day a week. So maybe it won't be such a big issue, in that people will be showing themselves in the office as well as working from home. So we'll see. I'm not really sure where this will go.
And I think it's about the kind of purpose of the office, isn't it? And it's less about sitting there and tapping away at a screen, and more about that collaborative and those social interactions. Haifa.
Yeah, I think the office will certainly feel different with fewer people, isn't it? People expecting to find lots of colleagues to speak to are going to find half the colleagues at home. The feel is going to be definitely different. And certainly when you think about redesigning the office, for this to work, to have hybrid arrangement, you do need more rooms set up with good video conferencing facilities, with big screens. They can have big, nice, pictures of all the colleagues on the screen, not tiny laptops, and very good microphones to pick up everyone's voices in the room, because it's so easy to forget people on the other side, and equally forget people in the room wanting to listen to people at home.
Yeah, we definitely need technology. Advanced approach. I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring it to a close, but Alan, because you haven't spoken for a little bit, I'll just ask you if you've got any final points.
No, I haven't at all. I mean, I say this is a research agenda, I think. Sorry, I would say I'm a research professor, so it's grist to my mill, I suppose I would say. But I mean, it really is, and everyone in this call has got a stake in this. And as I say, I think it's going to be with us for decades to come. We're going to have to work this out. At the moment, we're working through the pandemic. We're not really thinking beyond the pandemic yet, are we? Because we're not beyond it. But when we do get beyond it, aside from all the fiscal issues that the government will have, I think business will have an issue in terms of how it's going to cope. And obviously the CIPD will be very important in that process. So, I think, it's a world to come. We don't quite know what it might be, but I think it will be majorly different to what it was before March.
So watch this space, and I'm sure Alan and Haifa and everybody will be doing much more research to come on this. I'd like to also flag before we finish that we've run a number of webinars on topics that people are putting questions about that I didn't have time to ask. So we had a few questions that were more about the tactical side of home working. So we ran a webinar on long-term home working a couple of weeks ago. You'll be able to find that on our website. We also ran a webinar on hybrid working and inclusivity about a month ago. So that is also available on the CIPD website. So do check those out because they might answer some of your questions. But I'm afraid I'm going to bring it to a close there because we're out of time. Thank you so much to Haifa, Alan and Tim for your insights. Thank you everybody for your brilliant questions and for engaging in the chat. We don't have a webinar next week. We're having a week off, but then we'll be back on the 5th of November where we'll be doing a kind of policy update, looking at all the recent interventions from government and talking about what HR needs to know. But that is it from us for now. Thank you so much for watching and have a brilliant afternoon, and we will see you soon. Goodbye.